On today's show, we're finally finishing off our prospect pool rankings with the top 2 prospect pools in the NHL, and we'll recap the whole series. We'll be looking at Montreal and San Jose on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hage QMJHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and crossover scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll be finally finishing off our prospect pool rankings. We've got the top 2 teams to talk about today, so Montreal and San Jose. We'll also be recapping the entire series and looking back at some interesting conversations we had about the prospect pools and where they finish off, how we kind of split hairs on certain teams. We'll look at all of that on today's episode. Before we get into that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, as usual, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next and what you thought of our rankings, of the episode, all that good stuff. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with the Montreal at number 2. Now, this was an interesting conversation. I actually pushed for Chicago here at 2. We're going to get into why exactly we kind of how exactly we split hairs on those 2 teams in the final segment here. But to start things off, let's look at the top 5 here for Montreal. We start off with Ivan Demidov at number 1, the clear number 1 pick in my opinion, even though the next prospects are pretty good as well. Demidov's just different gravy, isn't he?
He absolutely is. This is the first player I think that has like superstar potential as a forward that Montreal has had in how many decades now? It's been a long time, and he's been playing fantastically in the KHL to start off the season, even in relatively like sparse minutes for the most part with SK St. Petersburg, and he's the best puck handler that we've scouted in the last 5 years, like as long as we've been doing this, and the upside is just tremendous. He's a do-it-all offensive winger. He can also maybe play down the middle. We'll see if Montreal tries to develop him as a center. That would be wild, but either way, whatever position he ends up playing at the NHL level, he's going to be leveraging his high-end, like elite level hockey sense, elite level puck handling, really high-end goal-scoring ability, and elite playmaking to just cause chaos and create a lot of dangerous chances in the offensive zone. And this is a very exciting prospect for fans of Le Tricolore. But the next player is already lighting it up and is already getting basically the entire Bell Center on their feet on a shift-to-shift basis in Lane Hutson. So talk me through his game and what entrenched him here at number 2 on our list.
It's the progression. There's a reason he was picked at 62nd overall in the 2022 NHL draft. He still had some progression left to do in his game. I don't think either one of us had him that low. I don't think anyone had him that low, really. But the concerns were there in his draft year. The defensive game, the pivots were really rough to watch. He was struggling to keep up with bigger, faster opponents, but his time in the NCAA really helped him kind of round out his game on that side. I thought that, especially in the preseason, Lane Hutson was, I think, at his best. He's still a prospect who's developing, learning how to read the game at a higher level, especially on the breakout. There were a couple turnovers he made and that kind of stuff, but he didn't make defensive mistakes when it came to defending the rush, heading back in his zone. His pivots were strong, so the things that he needed to work on in order to be an NHLer are there. And he's basically cemented himself on that second pair with David Savard through the preseason games that we've watched. There's basically nothing that Hutson has done that has shown that he's not ready for the NHL. And he's got the awareness, the decision-making ability, the elite high-level stick handling and kind of misdirection skill that he has from the blue line is just absolutely mesmerizing to watch. And he's going to be bringing that on a second power play for Montreal for a long time, right?
He really will, and I mean, he has that dog in him as well. Like, he never gives up on a play, and that's really what has made him relatively effective in his own zone through the preseason. He just keeps on trying, and even when he gets beat, he gets on his horse and gets all the way back. We saw him recover from multiple plays, and even though he's rarely the best mechanical skater on the ice, especially in terms of forward strides, straight line speed, he works his butt off on every single shift.
Yeah.
And when you pair that with the elite level brain, with the elite level skill, with that creativity and the desire to make plays in the offensive zone, you have a player that I think is already going to be doing some real damage inside a top 4 as an NHL rookie this season.
Absolutely. He's been looking fantastic so far. There's also David Reinbacher, who unfortunately got injured 13 seconds into the Toronto Maple Leafs game at the Bell Center there. It wasn't a dirty play or anything like that. It was just a routine hit, but he fell awkwardly and left the Bell Center in a brace and on crutches. So something bad on the knee side for sure. But yeah, overall, Reinbacher had a pretty decent preseason as well. He didn't stand out, but that's not what he does. He's a simple, effective, strong skating, strong rush defending, physical defenseman who's able to suppress plays incredibly intelligently, make the right decisions in order to move pucks to players who can show a bit more creativity and orchestrating skill. Reinbacher's your simple kind of meat and potatoes defenseman that brings a lot of value to the game as a 6'2", 200-pound player who can, as a right shot D especially, who can kind of bring a bit of everything. But his offensive game has progressed. He's been making more high-end reads. He's been kind of activating offensively, jumping into the rush, activating down low in the offensive zone. So we're seeing some glimpses of what Reinbacher can bring offensively. But make no mistake, Reinbacher is first and foremost a defensive player. And I think the perfect D partner for Lane Hutson long term. That's a great combination. Yeah. We also have a pretty high-end goalie prospect here in the Canadiens pool. Jacob Fowler has been amazing as well. He ends up at number 4 in our prospect pool rankings. And I think that was kind of the main difference, and we'll talk about that in more detail, between Montreal and Chicago, is we really liked Montreal's goalie prospects a decent amount more. Jacob Fowler's so calm, so composed, so mature. I mean, his tape with Boston College has been amazing to watch as well, right?
Absolutely, it has, and just to like piggyback off of your point there, I also think the other big difference maker is just that Demidov is by a decent amount the best prospect in either of these two pools between Montreal and Chicago, which was a difference making factor. But at the top end of this ranking, all these teams have fantastic prospect pools, and ranking them is a fun exercise. But it's we're not going to be right on every single one of these takes. It's difficult to look at the Montreal pool and not put it top 2 in my eyes, because at number 5, we have Michael Hage, who is also a player with top 6 upside, really skilled, really gifted offensively. The skating, the handling, the shooting, the playmaking are all well above average. Over the course of last season, his defensive game and his shift-to-shift engagement also took really big steps, and he's off to a great development program at the University of Michigan. And there is a very long list of very solid prospects going through the honorable mentions here, starting off with Joshua Roy, who is going to crack the Habs lineup out of camp, likely even playing a top 9 role. He also has some top 6 upside in his game. Owen Beck has been sent down to the Laval Rocket, but he could be a third-line center on this team for a very long time, and if it's not what the Habs, it's probably going to be somewhere else because he is of that caliber. Adam Engstrom is a fantastic skating left-shot defenseman who's going to be playing his first season in North America this season. Logan Mailloux is a really good offensive defenseman whose defensive ability and thinking of the game still need a decent amount of improvement, but the tools are likely enough to carry him to at least a ceiling of like a number 4, number 5 offensive leaning blue liner at the NHL level. But there's so many guys here, right? I mean, Oliver Kapanen stood out massively throughout training camp. He might steal a job. He looked like an NHL regular in a middle 6 role in the games that he did play, but it's still preseason, certainly, but the level of maturity and polish in his game was very impressive. And Tyler Thorpe, I'll leave the rest after this to you, but he's a player that out of nowhere, after being drafted in the 4th or 5th round by the Habs this past summer, dominated throughout rookie camp, lit it up in both prospects games against the Leafs prospects, and has gone back to the WHL and is just playing fantastic hockey there, combining high-end physicality, really good shot, and just overall like refined habits, and he looks like a 20-year-old rather than an 18-year-old who was just drafted.
Yeah, Tyler Thorpe's development has been fantastic to watch ever since, technically his draft eligible season was the 2022-23 season. He was drafted as an overager here by the Montreal Canadiens in 2024. So his progression was great. I mean, he went from this kind of straightforward meat and potatoes, kind of physical, north-south, bottom 6 forward to being pretty much the best prospect on his WHL team. And then, since coming back to the WHL, has just continued on that route. So he's been amazing to watch over the past couple of years. And I'm really excited about what he can bring to the Canadiens. But to just circle back on Oliver Kapanen, he wasn't just great and didn't just look like an NHLer. He was irreproachable. Like his approach to the game was amazing. His reads defensively were fantastic. There's just so much to work on that side. But that's not even the end. Logan Sawyer is also in this pool. He was great in the BCHL last year and at the World Junior A Challenge. Vincenz Rohrs playing top line minutes in the Swiss National League as well.
4 goals in 6 games.
4 goals in 6 games. It's looking amazing on that side. And that's not even counting Charlton Farrell, Atos Koivu. There's the amount of depth. Philip Meshar is also in here as well. It's impossible not to forget a prospect when you're talking about the Habs prospect pool. It's deep. There's a lot of talent. There's a lot of floor. There's a lot of upside. You've got a mix of basically everything you need. But they do not edge out the number 1 prospect pool in the NHL here, which is just absolutely ridiculous and might just be the best prospect pool we've ever seen in the NHL's history. We'll get into that in just a second. We'll talk about San Jose's prospect pool at number 1, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
Hey NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And you can do that for any number of sports, whether you are an American football fan or maybe even a European football fan. The Champions League is now up and running with the first match day in the rear view, and all the big leagues have now more than gotten started. Or maybe you're more partial to tennis or golf. Whatever floats your boat, you can take your swings on with FanDuel. That is FanDuel.com.
Alrighty, so let's finally talk about the number 1 prospect pool in the NHL to close off the prospect pool rankings and our top 32 prospect pools. The San Jose Sharks are the runaway number 1 prospect pool in the NHL. I don't think it's even a doubt at this point. And like I said just before we started this segment, I think this might be the best prospect pool we've ever seen in the NHL's history. We start at number 1 here with the recent number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NHL draft. Macklin Celebrini ends up at number 1. Fantastic player, well-rounded, a two-way forward who can play a decent scoring game, who's got great playmaking touch as well, superb hands, but above all, it's his reads, it's his habits, it's his decision-making, it's the hockey sense in his game that really make his game tick. One of the best rush chance creators in terms of what he does on the ice to create a chance off the rush I've ever scouted. It's not just carrying pucks across lines, like Jack Hughes. It's give and goes at the blue line, driving the net, lifting a stick on his way there to open up a passing lane for his teammate to his other winger on the other side. It's, acceleration, deceleration, using momentum, using opponents as screens. His rush game is just so polished and so complete. Overall, I think that Celebrini is, if he's not playing in the NHL this year, he's going to be a top 6 player by next year. Yeah, right. I mean, there's no way he doesn't play on the San Jose lineup already.
He's already signed his ELC and he won't be playing in the AHL.
Exactly. So there's just no chance at all that we don't see Celebrini in a Sharks lineup full time this next season. He's ready for it. I think he's ready for top 6 minutes right now. The way that he approaches the game, the maturity in his game, there's just no doubt there. So let's just move right on to number 2 here with Will Smith, who was also fantastic in the NCAA last year and also signed his ELC and is also going to be playing most likely in the top 6 for the San Jose Sharks. Talk me through his game and what makes him special here.
He's a highly gifted and intelligent offensive creator. It really boils down to that. He's multifaceted in the offensive zone. He can score. He's a fantastic playmaker. That is his bread and butter in the end. And the handling is maybe a half notch below the playmaking, if not like on par with it. The offensive tools are really high end. He's still quite slight in his frame and he can be physically overpowered. And I do think there will be an adjustment curve with him more so than with Celebrini. Celebrini already just thinks the game like your average, like above average top 6 NHL forward already, and has the physical tools to play that game. With Will Smith, I do think there are going to be a couple speed bumps along the road in his NHL development, but still, the offensive upside is massive. He is in all likelihood going to end up as a top line winger or second line center alongside Macklin Celebrini, and either way, it's going to be a really nice 1-2 punch. And I think that just the offensive like capabilities are fantastic. He's a really good rush creator as well. He's really good in just breaking out of the defensive zone into the offensive zone. He's a very capable puck carrier and puck handler. And while the defensive actual engagement could still leave a little bit of room to be desired, he's going to progress in those areas at the NHL level, and you aren't going to be paying him his money to be your shutdown centerman. It's just not his game. That said, there's a lot of other blue chip prospects in this pool. It does not just end with the top 2 like it does with a lot of other teams that we've covered in this series so far. At number 3, newly acquired goaltender who is quite possibly also going to be the starter. Like, the insane thing is that our top 3 on this list are likely all going to be not just NHL regulars, but big time contributors for the Sharks this season. Yaroslav Askarov is probably going to be the starting goaltender with the San Jose Sharks this season. And what have you liked about his game, and what makes him one of the clear top 2, top 3 goaltending prospects league-wide?
It's his aggression, it's his hockey sense, it's his ability to read the game at a high-end level. The athleticism is off the charts. The post reads are off the charts. Just a very smart, very aggressive, very athletic, very capable netminder who has all the physical tools in order to be an NHLer. The only thing that's held him back from the starter role, in my opinion, or at least even just a full-time backup role in Nashville before his trade, was the fact that he can get too aggressive. He can get a bit too kind of post to post, a bit too frantic in the crease. I think that in a role like he's going to have with San Jose, it's inevitable that he's going to inherently learn how to kind of reel that back, because he won't be playing 20 games where he'll have to prove himself. He might be playing 40, 45, 50 games in a Sharks jersey. And he's going to have to adapt that naturally, because he won't have as much energy on each push when you're playing that many full games in a regular season. So that should replace itself kind of organically with Askarov. But this isn't even the end of it. This is how good this pool is. At number 4, we have Quentin Musty, who's a big, skilled forward who can do a bit of everything offensively. Great handler, great shooter, great passer. He's got a really complete offensive skill set. His defensive game has come a couple steps since his draft year, and his hockey sense grew massively in his draft year and has continued to improve. It was a big issue in his draft year where he'd make really bad reads, really, didn't really see the ice that well. But by the end of the year, I thought he was one of the smarter prospects in the draft, and combine that with the skill, the size. Oh my goodness, this is going to be a great prospect for San Jose. And at 5, we have Sam Dickinson, who was drafted, 11th overall in the 2024 NHL draft.
It was indeed.
Yeah, 6'2", 195 pounds, I believe. Left shot defenseman. He isn't necessarily a player I'd call punishing, but he's very suffocating off the rush. He's very good at suppressing chances off the rush, pushing up offensively. He's very daring with the puck as well, a fantastic skater. I think the main issue is the reads, the hockey sense. That still needs to come a couple steps. Yeah. But for me, he just looks like a jacked up Caden Gooley in terms of where Gooley was in his development versus what Sam Dickinson could become, right? For sure.
I also think that there's a lot more room to grow offensively with a player like Sam Dickinson than a Caden Gooley. He's a fantastic defenseman that I don't believe should have dropped outside the top 10, but he did. And San Jose was quite giddy to add him into the fold, because he's also a profile that they really needed to add in terms of not just some size and physicality on the defensive end, but just some like real smothering rush defending, because there are other blue line prospects that we can get into here as well in the honorable mentions category, are really good puck movers, really intelligent, and very much like foils to Sam Dickinson, like Luca Cagnoni, who's been playing a fantastic preseason for the Sharks, playing upwards of 25 minutes, 27 minutes in a couple games. He's going to be playing a big role pretty soon, I think, for San Jose. Give it a year or two. Shakir Mukhamadullin is another really big mobile defenseman who, like Sam Dickinson, has some problems in terms of the processing aspects of his game, but he'll likely also be playing full-time with the Sharks this season. Igor Chernyshov is a player that both of us really appreciated last year in his draft year.
How
Couldn't
is he
even
not
crack
in the
the
top
five.
five? This is ridiculous, right?
He's a guy that could also be a top 6 talent when he finishes developing.
Yeah.
Like, he has a wicked shot, fantastic defensively, really smart player, great skater, really great puck handler. Passing game could still grow a little bit, but so much to like and work with. And the list just goes on. Kasper Haltonen's a really good goal scorer. Daniil Gushchin should be making the team this season and providing valuable offense. Cameron Lund is a decent mobile center prospect. Philip Biestedt is a really decent prospect. Matthias Havelid, Leo Selling-Vilenius, the list just never stops here with the San Jose Sharks, and we still have guys like Jack Thompson and Colton Roberts and Ethan Cardwell and Eric
Polkamp and Carson Wedge. I mean,
it goes on. There's a lot of talent in this pool, and there really wasn't any conversation to be had for us of who ended this list at number 1. The only conversation we had in top 3 was between Montreal and Chicago, which we will explore a bit further in the next segment. But number 1 was entrenched from day 1, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Nothing else to add on my end. So we'll move right on to our third segment here and close things off for this episode. We'll recap the entire prospect pool rankings and really focus on some specific conversations we had, mainly in the top 15 between teams. We'll get into that in just a second, but just before, a quick word from our sponsors at Game Time. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, Game Time is the best place to secure them. Game Time is safe, secure, super easy to use, and they are obsessed with saving you money. They've got a bunch of deals to help you save, last minute deals, zone deals, flash deals, all of the deals that you need in order to make the best decision for your wallet. And they have all-in pricing now, which is an option you can toggle in the app in order to see the final price for your tickets after fees, after taxes, so you know exactly what you're paying for, you know the exact amount, no surprises, and you can make the best decision for your wallet there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. Just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's close things off here with our recap of the prospect pool rankings. I'll go through the teams very quickly. 32, Edmonton. 31, Boston. Tampa, Florida, Vegas at 30, 29, and 28. Then we have the Islanders at 27, the Ottawa Senators at 26, LA Kings at 25, New Jersey Devils at 24, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and New York next. Then we have Colorado, Vancouver, Winnipeg, St. Louis, Nashville, Buffalo to close off the second half of the top 32. And then in the top 15, the Buffalo Sabres at 15, the Dallas Stars at 14, and the Washington Capitals at 13. We need to have that conversation because it was a difficult talk to have regarding how we would rank these three teams, because both of them have really solid top fives. I mean, you look at Buffalo's top 5, Hellenius, Kulich, Östlund, Roseanne, and Wahlberg. Funnily enough, I mean, 3 Swedes, 1 Finn, and a Czech player in this top 5, so no North Americans in the top 5 here.
Yeah.
If you look at that top 5 compared with Dallas's and Washington's, and there's a conversation to have here, right?
There certainly is a conversation. I mean, I remember when we were ranking Dallas and Washington, it was very difficult to separate those two because, I mean, both teams have a top prospect in a very similar mold. Dallas has Logan Stankoven, Washington has Ryan Leonard. I think those two players play relatively similar styles of games, and I think have pretty similar upsides and overall impacts in their projections. But with Buffalo, I think part of it came down to I don't know if they have a single player that can have quite as big of an impact as a Stankoven, as a Ryan Leonard, as much as I appreciate players like Hellenius, Kulich, and Östlund. But these three teams you could have put them in a blender and popped out a name in any order, and I wouldn't have minded too much. But in the end, I think also depth was one aspect that we had a bit of a conversation around, because Buffalo's is pretty okay. I think Adam Kleber was probably the best 6th ranked prospect of any of these teams, but in the end we went with the overall upside rather than the depth conversation. But those are two very comparable prospect pools, both in their quality but also in the styles of players that they have in going down the depth chart.
Yeah, exactly. I think Buffalo has the best depth of these three overall. I mean, Strabak, Leander, Zemer, even Nochev, Osborne, Komarov, these are all some great prospects. I think, when you look at Dallas, for example, their honorable mentions we're talking about are on Manishin, Christian Kyrou, Tristan Bertuzzi, Matthew Semenoff, that really didn't move the needle for us in Dallas's favor. What really moved the needle in Dallas's favor was Logan Stankoven, Maverick Bourque, Liam Bichsel, Emil Hemming. Those guys are bona fide prospects who bring some decent elements to the hockey game there. So that was really the conversation between Buffalo and Dallas. And then the conversation between Dallas and Washington, Stankoven versus Leonard, take your pick. Basically, they're essentially the same player. But then after that, Andrew Crystal versus Maverick Bourque. I would take Crystal. Miroshnichenko versus Bichsel. I'm leaning Miroshnichenko as well.
Me too.
Tarek Parasak versus Emil Hemming. I know you prefer Emil Hemming. I prefer Tarek Parasak.
Yeah.
So that was a point of contention between us two, but the top three was just so clearly better for Washington there. And then Ryan Chesley versus Ayrton Martino. I like Ayrton Martino, but Ryan Chesley is going to be a bona fide NHLer. And on top of that, you look at the honorable mentions for both teams. Like I mentioned, Dallas aren't the best. You look at the honorable mentions for Washington, you have Cole Hutson in there, Leon Mugli, even guys like Vincent Iorio, Peter Sikora, Ilya Protas, Eric Smateko. There's some decent prospects to work with here for Washington, so they ended up at 13. The other conversation I wanted to discuss here is the one we had at the one we kind of hinted at the start of the episode there. Chicago versus Montreal. If you compare the two teams, I mean, we've already mentioned Demidov has the better ceiling and Jacob Fowler is a better goalie prospect of the two, but what else played in Montreal's favor here?
I mean, I think Lane Hutson is a little bit closer than Frank Nazar to being a game-changing NHLer at this stage. I think that was definitely a bit of a point in Montreal's favor. I know you actually would lean Nazar over Hutson in that prospect comp. I would disagree at this point. I think my take since their draft years changed on that front. We both had Frank Nazar ranked second overall in that 2022 draft class. But I think at this point I would bump Blaine Hutson a bit higher and Nazar a little bit lower. But those are two fantastic prospects, and both teams should be very, very happy to have those players in their folds. Beyond that, I think like if you compare the depth beyond the top five, it was also a clear point in Montreal's favor. With Chicago, you have names like Marek Van Acker, Sam Renzel, Nick Lardis, some really, really good prospects. On the Montreal side, though, you have guys like Joshua Roy, who's already going to be an NHL, or Oliver Kapanen, who's already going to be an NHL, or Owen Beck, who could already be an NHLer if Montreal had the room for him in the depth chart. I just think that at the overall depth compared with the also like the high end upside of Demidov just trumping anything in Chicago's pool was a difference making factor. But as we said in the previous segment, in this top three, like between those two teams, it could have gone either way. I think in the end, I think I leaned heavier towards Montreal. For you, was very much a coin toss, and maybe even like a 51-49 favor of Chicago. But I pushed a little bit for the Habs pool, both with the depth and the elite upside here.
Yeah, I think the other side of that is I'm just a very big fan of basically everyone that Chicago added in the 2024 NHL draft. John Mustard, AJ Spelliscy, Jack Pridham are a trio of amazing players that they added in the 2024 NHL draft in the mid rounds. Ethan Del Mastro, we haven't even really talked about that much. He was a pretty decent defensive prospect.
He's very close to the NHL.
Exactly. Sam Renzel is also in that boat as well. It's just you compare the top two Ds out, in the honorable mentions for both teams. Engstrom and Mailloux versus Ethan Del Mastro and Sam Renzel. I lean Engstrom and Mailloux. But the other side of that, like I mentioned, is just the amount of depth that they've added in recent drafts. I really, really like Ryan Green as well. I think he's going to be a great NHLer. Roman Kanserov is great. Gavin Hayes is great. Martin Mishak is great. There's a lot of depth to work with in Chicago as well, but it's just the combination of high-end upside for Montreal and Demidov with the better goalie prospect with I'd say the same amount of depth. Yeah, I mean, there's just for me that was the end of that conversation at that point. Let's also talk about just Minnesota versus versus Carolina here, because that was also a conversation, and it was a conversation centered around upside versus depth. Because as we mentioned in our Carolina episode, Carolina has an absolutely ridiculous prospect pool with so many prospects in it. But Minnesota with Jesper Wallstedt, Steve Bouillon, Danila Yurov, I think that was the tiebreaker there, right?
It absolutely was, and it was a really tough one just because, I mean, Alexander Nikishin, Bradley Nadeau, and Scott Morrow is a fantastic top three as well, and the depth definitely is stronger in Carolina than it is in Minnesota, but we view Jesper Wallstedt as a franchise-level goaltender, and we see Zeev Buium as a likely number one defenseman when he finishes developing, especially developing in Minnesota's system specifically. And add to that Danila Yurov, who I think is either going to be a fantastic second liner or a really good complementary first liner. And I didn't think that Carolina's top three could quite match that. That said, it also depends on philosophy, right? When you're ranking prospect pools, do you go with the team that has like 25 guys that are probably going to end up playing NHL hockey on some organization, or are you going to go with a team that has three very clear blue chip prospects? The choice is yours. I think that was a very open debate and could have gone either way. Certainly. I mean, with Carolina, the depth was just hilarious, right? When you have guys like Alexander Rykov, Nikita Artemanov, Jaden Perron, Justin Poirier, Jackson Blake, Fyodor Avramov, Noah Franzen, Gleb Trikazov, all in your honorable mentions. Yeah, that could push higher than 8th overall in these rankings, certainly. But in the end, we really we're very big fans of Jesper Wallstedt and Zeev Buium specifically.
Absolutely. And that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the episode, what you thought of our rankings, and what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rating and review. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next shows as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of October. This has been Hadi Kalakesh with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.